We're going to bid $6 million to do 75 terabytes of data labeling over the next 3 years. We'll do that for a tenth of the price in like 3 months.
Welcome to Space Terminal. Today, I'm joined by Justin Kelley, co-founder of Black Sheep Group, or BSG, building telemetry and RF signal intelligence for field data in LEO. Welcome, Justin. Walk me through the origin of BSG, of Black Sheep Group.
I've been doing this for about 20 years. BSG started probably 5-6 years ago. AI is big everywhere now. When it comes to identifying signals and classifying them, it's very, very difficult to have all the training data that you need to actually perform that act. So then when you scale that up to, say, LEO, the footprint is massive. And so in order to really be able to do any sort of signal classification from LEO, you need to have this robust ability to actually train and label data. It was a gap that we saw. People were all flocking to build the next inference, but no one was really making sure you have the data correct to actually build a good model.
What made you even think of entrepreneurship from being an operator?
I was in the Air Force, and I got out in like 2015. So I went and got my degree as an engineer. I got a job doing software development. I remember thinking, if I were the user, these are actually the requirements that I would want to fulfill. Sought out a new job where I thought, now I got these touch points with the customers. I'm not crazy. Their problems are things I figured were issues. My ethos of wanting to focus on what is the thing that's going to make us money and what are the gaps we need in the next 5-10 years. Hopefully I don't go bankrupt, and we'll kind of see what happens.
You're having conversations with customers. Training data is a huge choke point. What are you learning in these conversations?
I've been in this community, like I said, 20 years. If you look at the DoD and the IC, summarize what I see are the big hurdles. One, of course, is, training. I don't mean like data training. Defense or intel, actual training on what is RF. How do you use it? What information can you glean from it? What are the tools you need to use? Like, those are huge gaps at the government level. Take that to the next stage. We're going to use AI to solve our issues. So the amount of people that have DoD IC background in space, like I'm one of them, it's a pretty small community of people that know how to even use space. Commercial space doesn't have a robust amount of downlink terminals. So there's a delay in getting the information that you need. Once you get that information to the ground, those are huge infrastructure, huge frameworks to help exploit and disseminate information. So people get that data and they're sort of lost. I have the data from commercial satellite. Now what do I do with it? So those are the two biggest gaps I think I see when it comes to RF signals, and then combine that with space.
How do you see your customers using this?
Let's use an example. I'm in Okinawa, Japan, and using DoD IC assets for space is also I wouldn't. It's a game of priority, right? So do I have the priority or not to actually get these assets? So assuming I don't, I'm going to move to commercial space. So, and whether it's commercial space or not. So the whole point of getting RF data is really to provide what we call INW, which is indication warnings. So if I'm in Okinawa, I want to know, what's around me. You have commercial signals like aircraft transmit what's called ADS-B, and that tells them where they're at, what altitude they are, what's their tail number. Ships transmit AIS, right? It's same information, just different waveform. But what about those guys that don't transmit those things? What are the dark ships? We also think about even in pirating or people who are fishing where they're not supposed to be. They turn all those things off, but they're still transmitting. The crews are still talking to each other over push to talk. They still have Satcom links on there. So by looking at RF data, even if they're not transmitting their position like they're supposed to be, you can use that RF data to determine who's active in this area, and then where are they? And then based upon what's transmitted, you can determine, okay, I know that this specific type of fishing vessel or this type of tanker or this type of, near peer military vessel has these waveforms on it. And that is the predominance of what people use this information for. The next step would be, once I've identified what's active, then you need to determine where they are. That's a much more complicated process, but it's pretty much a situational awareness. Like with our eyes, we look around to see what's around us. RF is no different. So we can't see the RF environment, so we need tools and capabilities to collect and identify what's active in the RF environment and then tell us, who's the operator, what's active, should I be concerned, do I need to try to figure out where this thing's coming from, and more importantly, I need to inform my combat commanders that this thing is active in the field as well.
5 years out, when BSG wins, what do your customers do differently than today?
I've got this, big, hairy, audacious goal. Use that same scenario of like in like the Indo-PACOM area. Right now, what happens is that they'll make a recording of it and they'll say, hey, I don't know what this is. And then they'll send it back to the United States. It ends up usually making its way back to, like, say, someone like NSA. They'll determine what it's associated to. So, like, this specific waveform is associated to this manufacturer of Satcom transmissions. And then they'll put out a proposal for a company to write a classifier. So they'll eventually push that capability forward. That entire timeline takes like 2 to 5 years. It's a really long time. The way they would do this difference, everything would be driven by like an AI-based like classification. I'm doing real-time classification of the environment. I see something new. I don't know what it is. I kind of annotate it. I send it back. They put it into the pipeline. It gets trained, and a new model is pushed out within 24 hours that can automatically identify what that thing is. So we're cutting out that whole pipeline process where you need to reverse engineer how that thing is being modulated. And then if we want to look at it from the space perspective, from LEO, you've got, a footprint that's the size of a continent. That specific waveform shouldn't be in this area. You annotate it, you train it, you push it out, and then the next time you get your LEO data in, it runs through the model and identifies what's active. And then it says, hey, this same thing that you labeled yesterday is active again. So instead of waiting 2 to 3 years to get new things to the front, we're looking at like a day to like 6 hours. What else? Whether I'm a Marine, I'm a soldier, I'm an airman, and whether I'm stationed in Korea, Okinawa, or flying sorties, or I'm based on a ship, on a destroyer, everybody's sort of contributing to this same pool of data, and then the models are being generated and distributed out to everyone at the same time. In 5 years, that is what I would love to see, is this rapid ability to know what's active within 24 to 48 hours.
You're able to run classification real time. Walk me through the technology.
We recognize that like a single type of model is not going to like cut muster. We have a variety of transformer-based models, convolutional neural network. We take the results out of those. We actually feed those into a LLM. If it's raw digitized RF data, we call that INQ. Sometimes we just get images of the spectrum. We run against all these different models, depending on where it was collected, what the environment was like. That then actually goes through a bunch of triaging and deconfliction and rule-based algorithms that we've written. If you have bigger GPUs, you can run, multiple different parameters. As we start scaling that down, we have to quantize the models, make them smaller, make them a little more robust. So in terms of what are we doing different in our technology, we're using the same corpus of data, but then the deployment is sort of tailored depending on where it needs to fit.
Legacy ground-based signal intelligence exists, albeit not as sophisticated. And you're building this hybrid space-based intelligence to lower latency. Is it more economical?
Right now, it's break even. Look at like ChatGPT. Any of the big AI companies, the initial investment was gigantic. A lot of infrastructure has to be put into place. So we've had to invest a lot in compute, a lot in storage, a lot in GPUs, a lot of iteration. So right now, the amount of IRAD we have to invest is pretty substantial. Looking at that pipeline of an engineer, the amount of time they would do that and the amount of money would cost. We are doing it quicker. What we're projecting is where we'll probably at around 48 months, significantly cheaper, but we're able to do a lot more. When you amortize the cost against everything you're able to do, that is really where we're starting to separate. We still use tried and true traditional DSP techniques, performing more as like that sanity check for us. What we want to show is, here's how much faster we were able to do it.
There are myriad of space startups who are also approaching, not necessarily with AI, possibly better sensors or other techniques for signal intelligence. What do you do in 10 minutes that takes them 10 months?
I'm a former operator. We got a bunch of DSP engineers. We approach it from a perspective of I'm a signals guy, I'm an electronic warfare guy. What are the things I need to know? For example, right now, what we've noticed, no one's really tackling the whole data labeling side of the house. So no one's tackling that. So we have seen a couple of big primes bid on contracts that we won, say, we're going to bid $6 million to do 75 terabytes of data labeling over the next 3 years. We'll do that for a tenth of the price and we'll get it done in like 3 months. The way that they want to tackle it is like from an AI perspective first. And there's no reason to throw away 5 decades of like DSP. We're also kind of a little bit more nimble, a little bit more hungry. Your startups, which are mice, you have your companies that are like small but agile, and those are gazelles. And then you have like your big companies and their elephants, real slow moving, big behemoths. And so it's nice to compete with elephants because their pricing is like really inflated. Their go-to-market strategy is like very different, like they're always like, well, this is what it is, take it or leave it.
Could you take a step back and categorize where traditional DSP is still table stakes and where the use of an AI first approach give you an insurmountable advantage?
AI is going to be able to say very, very quickly, this is this signal, but that's about where it stops. A common technology for push to talk is called DMR. And sometimes people need to know all the metadata associated with that signal. Who's talking to who? AI is not going to do that, at least not right now. So where AI is going to be vastly superior to DSP is on that front end, like very quick, rapid classification. What's active where? I think DSP is always going to have a part, at least in the short term, until we figure out how to like do an AI-based demodulator. So in the meantime, for I would say 80% of people, that's actually enough. For that 20%, what we would do is use AI first as that first step classification of, okay, what's active where? Then pair that with a traditional DSP technique to actually break it out.
Rank these variables from 1 to 4, and 4 means mission critical in 2026. Compute speed,
3
space congestion,
for right now,
GPUs,
4,
training data,
4.
and talent, the actual engineers.
Yeah, that's probably 3.
We go back to the 4s. Why are they mission critical?
So one, I think GPUs are obviously, like, as we move to AI, right, is absolutely critical. I think that it's important to note that, like, when I say GPUs, there's many, like, obviously sizes of GPUs to actually deploy. So when we're talking about training things, yeah, we need big GPUs, like A100s, H100s, et cetera. But then what's the next generation of, like, what's the next Orin NVIDIA GPU? Like how, because we're really limited right on what we can do on the edge where we don't have a lot of power, but we're pretty limited in what we can do with an Orin. So what's the next generation of low size, low swap GPUs? So that right now is a big bottleneck. Like I subscribe to a lot of newsletters. You kind of get on all those marketing things like NVIDIA sends out, always stand on that. So let's say NVIDIA releases the next GPU. I typically have to start interfacing with like a integrator to say, it would be great if this could go into a ruggedized box. How much is that going to cost? Just because the GPU has been released, I can't necessarily use it yet because it's got to meet certain requirements from ruggedization. Normally, military people want to use a BB2590 as a battery. So there's a lot of engineering that goes in on the hardware side. I was told once, you can either be a software company or a hardware company. You can't be both. Otherwise, you do both poorly. Usually small companies like us that are small and nimble that, want to build something small. Usually they'll get like quotes from them. They'll send me a ROM about what it would cost. And then I'll typically get a dev board, see what we can do with it. And then if there's a need, usually get customer interest, see if we can meet that sort of min buy. And then usually we just have to lean forward. So we are at a bit of a disadvantage when it comes to a big that has their own fab capability. Integrators are key. Honestly, a lot of times, like if I see an opportunity for someone else, I'll email them and I'll say, hey, want to do this introduction. I thought you guys would be a good fit. Likewise, we get responses back from them that are, in the same manner. So it's really like building that network up of small companies. Usually starts years ago with like a cold call, talking to some sales guy, usually trying to get a hold of an engineer after that, and just sort of building up those, friendships, for lack of a better word. I'll go to trade shows and just walk around and grab pamphlets of, like, I was at AOC recently, and things that I have no need to do right now, like cable manufacturers or like fabricators, just sort of building up that repertoire, that Rolodex of companies. I think that's where it starts. But yeah, those integrators are important. And usually it's like those personal friendships and relationships that you build up over years is what ends up making it more manageable. Like, I'll tell you a story. There was a company that we built up a relationship with over the years. And this is like from before I even started BSG, and reached out to them. They're like a medium-sized company. And I asked them, I said, hey, listen, my customer wants this. I think this existing platform you have would be great. We need some tweaks though. And they asked, okay, well, what's the quantity we're looking at here? And I said, it's going to be low, maybe 20, but it was also a pretty high value item. It's like 120K a pop. And, I talked to the engineer and they modified one. It's rough, but it's sitting over here, like they leaned forward, they modified one and they sent it to me and they say, hey, let me know what you think. If it works out, we'll give you a price for what it costs to make this a more operational thing, and we can go from there. So yeah, not being a jerk is key.
There is a huge need for electronic warfare, for jamming, spoofing, detection in LEO. How do you design differently?
If I were designing a spacecraft, I need to assume I'm going to get GPS jammed, right? It's going to happen. I'm not the target necessarily, but just by proximity of where I'm currently flying, I'm going to pick up GPS jamming. If I usually have a LEO and I'm doing RF, I usually have a constellation. I have 2 to 3 spacecraft, flying in the constellation, so I can do some sort of geolocation. GPS timing and GPS position is absolutely critical. If I were designing a spacecraft today, I would make sure that I've got Cesium clocks. That way, if I lose GPS, I can do what's called free run until I can retain GPS lock and get disciplined again. That way, I'm not losing my ability to do that mission critical aspect where I start hitting jamming. So one of the things we saw in the past I thought was a really good idea is that there was a dedicated receiver just for GPS. On the GPS receiver, they would actually go ahead and save that data off as well. Anytime they suspected that they were being GPS jammed, they were the free run. And then also, in addition to that, use that information for tip off. Where did I experience GPS jamming? Where I was able to mitigate it? And then where did that GPS jamming come from? That's a pretty critical aspect that I think DoD is going to want. Commercially, it's not a huge addition to be able to support that. When we're dealing with what's going on in Europe, in the Middle East, and eventually inside of Indo-PACOM, you have to assume that any sort of GNSS denial is going to be needed. Then on the other one would be like downlink. Like, I need to be able to downlink my data fast. I think that commercially, people are okay with like an 8 to 10 hour delay on getting their data. I think that if you're talking DoD, if you start talking multi-hour time windows to get the data to the customer, it's like, well, I don't really care anymore. I would say you need to move processing up. So instead of downlinking all the data down to the ground, you need to do as much processing as possible in space. So that would mean putting GPU compute power in space, and it doesn't even have to be a lot. Again, going back to like SIG and EW, am I able to characterize the environment during my orbit? Can I get that information while I'm flying so that I'm only sitting down what's important? If I'm only sitting down what's important, we're reducing that timeline by hours, instead of, hopefully down to, on a single pass, I can just send down the data I want. So I think those are some of the key things we need to move towards is one, like GNSS, like strength. And then the other one would be like, hey, we really need to start doing processing on board. So we can just move the data products down instead of trying to be a vacuum cleaner and send everything down.
And how do we achieve true edge compute in space? What actually shifts that needle to true edge compute?
In San Francisco, all the founders there, a lot of them are really tackling like it was the right idea. So like James, I'm gonna butcher his last name, Shalakwick. I'm sorry, James, if you're listening.
Zora Space.
Yeah. His company is doing like the optical down, tackling it from the perspective of, okay, if we can't do all the compute on the edge in space, we're going to get the data down fast enough. So very good idea. There was another gentleman that was there who was speaking. We went over to his office the next day and talked to him, and everything was kind of in Leo, kind of using laser opticals but between satellites. Like that's another approach. So instead of trying to do the compute on the platform itself, optically send it back still in Leo, but to some centralized location actually do the compute. So like a race to do a data center in space. So that's another approach. You're basically focused on getting the data off of the platform to compute somewhere else that you can, have that processing power. Going back to that conversation about GPUs. So like if we can get, the next generation of GPUs that are like small and powerful, fielded to space, I think that is another way we can go about it. One of the interesting things though, after talking to that gentleman afterwards is
Dennis
Yes, thank you.
from Space Built.
Dennis, yeah. Him and I, we geeked out for like 3 hours. It was amazing. One of the things he agreed with me is we were talking about like space rated stuff, right? And how getting space rated stuff is so hard. And he was sort of giggling and saying like, I just don't understand because I'm looking at like some of the drives and stuff he's got in there. And I was like, are those like space rated? He was like, no. He's like, those are just standard drives. He's like, they'll work. You got to like prep the environment properly, but nothing says you can't put that stuff into space. And it got me thinking. I was like, okay, well, if more people can be on board with that and say, hey, we're going to put this in a box, this is going to be a payload on a spacecraft, will it survive in space? And if the answer is yes, then fly it. Because the moment you put that space rated tag on something, you, I think, immediately go back like 4 generations in capability because getting it truly space rated is such a long, expensive, arduous task. Very expensive. And it's like, all right, if we can really truly lean forward on the more like disposable platforms, and by disposable, I mean the life cycle, the printed lifespan of the platform is a year. If we're willing to lean forward and do non-space rated equipment that, if it lasts longer than a year, great. I bet you $1 it would. And just, lean forward and say, hey, let's put XYZ, in space. Like the DoD has this thing called the SOSA standard, right? So like a SOSA compliant card and SOSA compliant GPU and compute, and it's like all in this little chassis. Like fly a SOSA chassis, see if it'll survive in space. I mean, if you do that, you could put probably 10x the capability, maybe 100x the capability of what we see in space now, in probably the same swap. It's just not space rated. Either A, with Elon Musk kind of approach of like fly it, if it blows up, we learned. I mean, it's just, I think that's what you got to do. And if it works, great. And if it doesn't, like, oh, well, we tried it and we can go from there. Like, I don't know how many times in engineering, because my background is not traditionally engineer, I was just a dumb, EEW guy. So many, thoughts and ideas like, well, could we do this? And just getting shot down and say, that'll never work. And then you try it and it turns out like it works. So that would be I would love to.
We've definitely seen this across industries where the outsider sometimes has the better approach because you don't overthink as much, you come from less rules, regulations, and red tape. Back to your other life with Air Force, later the Marine Corps. What are some lessons you carry forward?
Yeah, I think that humility is like always very important. It's underrated. And then there's this other thing called the Dunning-Kruger curve. The Dunning-Kruger curve is, imagine you have a graph. So on the x-axis is time and the y-axis is confidence. So when you start learning a skill, immediately over time you get very, 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 very confident in your abilities. At a certain point in time, when you're at the peak of ignorance, basically, because you're extremely confident, you start learning more and you realize that you actually don't know anything. And so you get into what's called the depths of despair. So you end up going almost below where you were when you started. And then slowly over time, this kind of creeps back up. So I think it's a combination of the two, is that, when I'm in a conversation with someone, we're talking about DSP or we're talking about AI or RF or EW, it doesn't matter what it is. If I'll never feel so confident about something that I'll bet my life on it. If somebody's really saying, you're wrong, this is the way it is, I'll take a step back and say, well, I haven't been in every scenario. It's possible I'm mistaken. Let me double check that. And, I think that humility of recognizing that you could be wrong is important. Like whenever you're dealing with customers and, they're telling you, I need to be able to do X, Y, Z. When I first became an engineer, I thought I was smarter than everyone else. And I would sort of look at these requirements and I think, why do they need to do that? That doesn't make any sense. That's dumb. And usually there's a reason. Now, it's not to say that they aren't wrong, right? Like it's not to say that they're not wrong, but it could be due to some past experience or some past mission, they feel like this is needed. And instead of just saying, well, that's dumb, they say, okay, well, why is this needed? Why is this important to you? Go through that use case with them and determine, okay, what is the need that they're trying to solve? Once you understand the need, then from an informed position, you can go back and say, well, what if we did this? Or what if we did this like this instead? And then because you're approaching from their point of view, they're going to be more open. Whereas if you immediately say, I don't think so, I think we can just do this, they're going to get defensive and say well, what do you know? I'm telling you the requirements. I think being humble, going back into the Marine Corps at 38 years old, was a very humbling experience. Because, I'm in boot camp with 17, 18, 19-year-olds, and my drill instructors are in their 20s. And a lot of people told me afterwards, I don't know how you could do it. You're old enough to be their dad. And I was like, that's right. It's true. Yeah, I said, it's true. But you have to remember that, their experience being a Marine, they have infinitely more experience being a Marine than me. Do I have more life experience? Sure, but we're not talking about life experience. This is Marine Corps boot camp. And so whatever they have to say about being a Marine is infinitely more well-informed than whatever I have to say. The key takeaways I try to live my life by is be humble, know you can be wrong, don't be the smartest guy in the room. And if anybody listens to this that knows me from the past, they're probably going to chuckle because that was a long journey for me. You get very good at your job, and then usually the first thing that dies is your humility, and you get very cocky. There's always someone smarter, and you never know what the other guy's doing until you've walked a mile in their shoes.
3 generations out, why does American dominance in space, RF, space intelligence even matter?
Well, the cheesy answer is because we're America. In terms of American dominance in space, I think you have to, nobody's perfect. America's not perfect. The UK is not perfect. France isn't perfect. Brazil's not perfect. So I think you have to think of it in terms of, okay, the world is broken up into people who want their best interests. America obviously operates under what's under our best interest. Same thing with China and any other country. No country is truly selfless. Definitely understandable. I think that it's in terms of who's going to do, when a country has the reins to be that global dominance in any field, who's going to abuse it the most? Who's going to abuse it the less? Who's going to use their power mostly for good? And I think that, objectively speaking, I think that, our track record isn't flawless. However, I think that across the board, we have demonstrated that if given that power, we will be the most responsible with it. And I think that is really the only metric in which you can really judge it by. It's somebody's going to have dominance. So if somebody's going to have dominance, who should, like, if America has space dominance, we're of course going to share with our allies. That goes without saying. And we know that we'll share with our allies, and they know that we're going to share with them. I can't say that the same is true for other countries that would, have dominance. Does that tee us up for another Cold War in space? Yeah, probably. Like if we're kind of choosing sides, it does. And that's unfortunate. I think what I would love to see, when it comes to space is that a focus on space that then eventually, right now all of our satellites are all turned in, right? Everybody's looking inside. We're all spying on each other in space. The majority of space stuff is looking down. I would love to see in 30 years, those satellites are turned the other way. We still have our infrastructure, of course, but instead of focused on the land that we have here in the world, we're able to generate enough technology that we no longer have to look inside if we can start looking out. Unfortunately, without like a big spending ask coming from like the DoD, like we saw what happened after the end of the Cold War, space spending died. So unfortunately, if there is a space race that's coming that is military in nature, that is going to necessitate more technology being developed, more stuff fielded in space. And then hopefully we can get to a point where we're like, hey, we don't need to do this anymore. Maybe we'll compete over Mars. I'm okay with us competing over Mars or the moon or, asteroids for mining. Yeah. Whatever it is, it's kind of it's a nuanced question. It's really a bet. It's a gamble.
What should we look forward to from BSG over the next 3 months?
Over the next 3 months, we are planning not to go to our first couple conferences this year. We had our MVPs earlier this year, so hopefully we'll get to start going forward with that, kind of spreading the news. What we really want to do too is in terms of our focus right now is on DoD, DOW. We really want to push to commercial and start, pushing this ability to do these sorts of things commercially. Through the next 3 months, we'll start having more of a commercial facing face, which is exciting because that's new for me. It's new for the team too. We're hiring 6 more people, which is huge for us. And we are finally redoing our website. We're going to start making posts and stuff. We want this to be a more of a community approach. So our vision is that we really want to help foster the next OpenAI is for RF. Then you got to know someone to actually get involved in this. And so I think over the next 3 months, we're hoping to have more of a public facing appearance to hopefully start garnering more community interest, commercial interest, more collaboration. Space and RF in general is a huge market with lots of players doing lots of different things. And so hopefully we'll start collaborating more with other small companies and then have more of a public face.
How can satellite operators, integrators, and other defense partners contact you or BSG?
Well, we have a webpage. It's not very sexy right now, but we do have a webpage, bsg.org. There's a contact us link. You can always hit me up too, Kelley, Kelley, at bsg.org. There's an alias for radar at bsg.org too, because I'm a radar guy by trade.
This has been Space Terminal. I am Zuni from Imagining Forward. New episodes are out every week. You can find Justin, Kelley, and BSG in the show notes. You can also look up BSG on our intelligence tool at imaginingforward.space. Thank you.